Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today, instead of talking about something specifically in comics, I'm going to hopefully talk directly to people specifically in comics. I'm going to talk to comic collectors, comic readers, and the comic makers who are making these new crowd-funded comics. And I'm going to put it all under the blanket of comic collecting. But those three categories of people, they're connected very intricately, and I just want to talk about that under comic collecting. And hopefully that if anybody who is putting together a crowd-funded comic is actually listening to this, they can make it through to the end, because I do have some things to say to them as well that I think are important. But to start off, I know that if you're a comic collector, you're a comic reader. I've never met anybody who was a comic collector who wasn't a comic reader. I'm sure there might be somebody out there, but there's a tiny, tiny little minority. So if you're a comic collector, you're a comic reader. And I was a comic collector a long time ago. As I said before in plenty of my other videos, I stopped reading comics around 1997 and didn't get back into them again until last year, when diversity in comics really just got me back into reading comics again. But even though I stopped reading comics in 1997, I stopped collecting comics around 1995. But when I got back into reading comics, I went through my old stuff because I kept it in good condition. It was always in good condition. It was always kept secure. And I went through comic price guides, the Overstreet price guides and things like that, because I was interested to see what my collection was worth. And actually, my collection is worth a lot more than I thought it was, probably 10 times more than I thought it was 2 years ago, because I have a lot of good stuff in there. And, these things include stuff like first appearance of Deadpool. I have my entire New Mutants collection is actually worth something. That's a shock to me. I have things like the first appearance of Sabretooth, first appearance of Warlock as him in early Fantastic Four comics. I have early runs from, say, Fantastic Four from numbers 60, 70, and 80. I have early runs of Daredevil, early runs of Captain America, X-Men, and these things are actually worth a lot of money now. But the newer ones, the ones that I had bought directly off of the shelf, like the Deadpool and things like that, again, a lot of those shocked me to see how much they were worth, and ones that I thought were worth something, which turned out not to be worth anything anymore, that were worth something at one point. And that's the strange thing about comic collecting. It does go up and down, but you want to get a comic book that's going to go up and up and up and not stop. At some point it might level out a little bit, but you never want it to go down. And I was really surprised at what had actually gone down as well as what had actually gone up. And I want to share a little bit about my going through my own collection and through the price guides and things like that, because right now I kind of spend like at least an hour a week going through a price guide. It's fun for me. I don't know why, it just is. But I seem to notice a lot of trends from what comic collecting used to be and what it is now, and how that came about. Just looking at it, not so much in the game, but stepping back and looking at it. And I'd like to share what I think I've discovered in these trends and share it with comic collectors. And the thing is that, again, I said before that most of my collection was Marvel. There's about 75% Marvel, I'd say, about 20% DC, 5% something else. And that actually worked out really well for me as being a comic collector and what my collection is worth, because DC it's not worth anything. It just isn't. At one point, these comics from DC might have been worth something, but they're not anymore. I'm looking at my issue of Hellblazer #1, which I thought would continue to go up and up because it was really expensive at one point. And I thought that was great. But it kind of went down. It's nowhere near what it used to be. It went down. And I looked at other things from DC that have gone down as well. I remember kicking myself back in the day when Doom Patrol originally came out. I bought Doom Patrol when it originally came out. I thought it was a really good, fun, sort of 50s-like comic feel to it. But then I started reading it, and they just didn't do anything with the story. It was not good. It was kind of like All-Star Squadron. You know, you look at it and go, that looks really good, but then you start reading it and go, why am I reading this? But anyways, the thing was, I stopped reading it, and then somewhere around issue 20, they turned it over into basically a Vertigo book, and my issue number 1 of Doom Patrol wasn't worth anything, but when they switched it over to that new format, that went way up back, I think it was late 80s, early 90s, I think that was. And I was kicking myself for not having bought that. I wouldn't have bought it to begin with. The art style, it just drove me nuts. But when I look at it now, it's not worth anything anymore. It's just not. And that seems to go for almost all of DC. You know, you might have some things that were worth something or not worth anymore. You might find some things that are worth a little bit. But for the most part, if you're looking at comics, at the very least from, we'll say, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and I would say onwards, although I don't know all that much about onwards, they're not worth anything. And I thought about, well, why aren't they worth anything? And it really comes down to the fact that DC has its core heroes. And that's what they concentrate on. And when you have your core heroes, you have your Superman, you have your Batman, your Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, Flash, you have your core heroes. And that's what they center their company around. There's nothing wrong with that. It works for them. But they don't have any lasting characters that are going to make an impact on you and are going to stick around for 20 years. They come up with new characters, and some of them come in, some of them come out. They're in various books and various incarnations, sure. And they might start out as having a book which rises in price, but since they only concentrate on those core characters, everyone else is going to fade away. And when those characters fade away, then those books are going to fade away. They're no longer collectibles. They're no longer worth anything. And this especially happens when times get bad. And times are now getting bad for comics. I think they're going to get a lot worse for the big two before they get better. And when times get bad, what DC does, it does what any sensible person does when they're in retreat. They fall back to their most defensible position. And their most defensible position is their core characters. And everything else is going to fall by the wayside. So right now, buying DC Comics as a collector, it just makes no sense. Because they're not going to be worth anything. You should buy them as a comic reader. Just buy them as a comic reader. If you find good DC Comics, and there are certainly good DC Comics out there, just buy them as a comic reader, not as a comic collector. Because they're not going to be worth anything. And I know some people might be thinking to themselves, well, there might be that one out there, and I'll get that one or that two, and they'll be worth something. Yeah, but when you're paying $4, $5, $6 for an issue of a comic, even if you're buying, let's say, 10 DC Comics a month, that's 120 a year. There's no way that when you're paying like $5 a comic, that's going to be offset by that one or two good comics you find, and that's worth something. The cost to benefit ratio, it isn't there. You're never going to make that money back, especially if you're buying things like alternate covers. It's just not going to happen. You're going to be spending way more money than you're ever going to make as a collector on any of these issues if they become collector's items to begin with. So that's a problem with DC. And I think that right now, you should drop it as a collector. Buy it as a comic reader. That's it. Find a good story, buy it as a comic reader. But the thing is, the reason why Marvel didn't go that route is because Marvel used to be the house of ideas. That's what they used to be. They were actually, it wasn't just a slogan. It was what they were. They were the house of ideas. And they put new ideas into their comic books. And this is why they're still collector's items. Because they concentrated on new ideas, and they would put a new idea in there and not only just hype it up, but they would make people, fans, want to read and learn more about these characters. And these characters became something that people wanted to grab off the shelf. And when that happened, it gave them enough to put these characters in more and more books. It gave them stories that they could look back on for several years. And when you get to that point, they become a little bit ingrained in the entire Marvel universe. And you have a jumping off point there to keep them going forever. Think about Venom or Deadpool. That's the way it worked with Marvel. And that's why if you own the New Mutants, where it's New Mutants or X-Force, I'm pretty sure it's New Mutants, which is the first appearance of Deadpool, it's worth something because that character is still around. That character was ingrained in people's minds and they like him, if not love him, and he's going to be around for a while. That's why those comics are still worth something. That's why they're good collector's items, and they're probably still going to go up in the future. And that's what's needed. And that's what DC is missing, because they always just go back to their old characters. And you're never going to have another actual Superman #1, no matter how many Superman comics they come out with, which says #1 on them. You're never going to go back to that. But you are going to, in Marvel, at the very least in the 80s and 90s, find characters that were new, like Gambit, that just became part of their universe. It became an integral part of their universe that people loved. And that's why they're good collectibles. But, and there's a big but there, but today, Marvel is not the house of ideas anymore. If anything, it's the house of bad ideas. I think that's the name we should give to Marvel from now on. It is the house of bad ideas. They don't have good ideas anymore. They don't have that spark to light the fire in the comic readers for a new character so that they can generate a lot of interest in that new character, so that they can generate a lot of books in that new character, so that it can start in a couple of years and everybody still wants more and more of it. And then that character becomes part of the universe, part of an integral part of the universe. That's not what's happening anymore. You got characters that nobody wants, that they keep just shoving in your face. And nobody wants them. And I know that a couple of issues of Captain Marvel #1, the new Captain Marvel, yeah, sure, they've gone up. But they're going to go down. Because all these characters are going to be forgotten. And I think their structure of their company has a lot to do with this, because they're hiring people that really shouldn't be writing comics, nor do they really want to write comics. One of the big things about putting into your customers a want for your character to get them invested in it is your enthusiasm and your passion to actually want to write this character for a long time. But these people that are writing for Marvel now, a lot of them, they know they're not going to be there in 5 years. They don't want to be there in 5 years. They probably don't want to be there now. It's just some kind of job that they have. There is no passion there. And they're not putting it into their characters. And the readers know that. And so they're not asking for more. So none of these characters, none of these new characters, they're not going to be remembered in 5 years, in 10 years, certainly not in 20 years. Things like the Champions are not going to be remembered any more than Damage Control from the 80s is remembered. Nobody remembers that. And because of this, Marvel, just like DC, is not worth collecting anymore. It isn't. Because, again, the only way that the books are going to go up and up and up in price and be a collector's item, and you actually get some money out of it, and it's going to be a good investment as a collector, is if those characters continue on. Because if those characters die, it doesn't matter how much it goes up now, it's going to go down. Unless you have your pulse on everything that's going on and you know exactly when to sell it, it's no good. It's no good to buy it as a collector. And again, the same problem with the cost-benefit ratio is there. Even if you think that there are going to be some that are going to be worth something soon, you're paying $5 a book for these things with variant covers. It's not worth it. So again, you should just buy them as comic readers. You should find something that you like in Marvel, if there's anything left there that you like, a good story, good art, and just buy it as a comic reader. Don't buy it as a comic collector anymore. It's just not worth it. And it's not going to be worth it. And I don't see any way that it's going to change for Marvel, because they're owned by Disney, and this big corporation feel to it is just killing the house of ideas that it used to be. But, again, there's another but. The but is that there is a place for comic collectors to go right now. And I talked about this in my very first video on this channel when I talked about Jawbreakers Lost Souls. The crowdfunding comics that are coming out now are where to go as a collector, because they have all the earmarks of what I'm seeing on books that are going up and up and up. One of the other things that are going up, which kind of baffles me, is I'm looking at the Overstreet price guides and things like that, because they have a lot of good notes on these things. And they're talking about, they give a note that, this was the last issue and it had a low print run, and therefore the price for a collector has gone up. And that kind of baffles me, because, of course, if it's the last issue of something, it was obviously being canceled. It was canceled because it was awful. Why would people want to buy an awful comic, even if it did have a low print run? It makes little sense to me. I mean, I understand low print runs if it's a really good book, but if it's a crappy book, I don't understand that. And I think that's one of the things that's going to go by the wayside, because the comic market is shrinking right now. As the comic market shrinks, the collector market is going to shrink. And I think the outliers of collecting, like buying last issues, which have low print runs, they're going to go down again too. But you look at the new crowdfunding comics, they have all the earmarks of being collector's items. You got low print runs right there. You got, along with low print runs, various things that are going to be sold in these books which aren't going to be found in other books. Again, the best example of that is Jawbreakers Lost Souls. None of these extras that come with the book when you get it from the crowdfunding source of Richard Myers is going to be in the Jawbreakers Lost Souls books that you will eventually be able to get in the stores. So you got low print run, you got extras that are going to be in these low print runs. And besides that, because I think that's enough to already drive the price up to make them collector's items, but besides that, you have these people who are creating these things, and they have a drive, they have a passion. They want to make these characters great. And as a person myself who has written characters and spent a lot of time with his characters, when they have a passion like that, when you have a passion like that, you want these characters to go on forever. Okay, my novel, which I'm trying to get published, I love my characters. I love my characters. I love writing my characters. I really hate doing the editing, but it's got to be done. But I love my characters. I just want to write my characters again and again and again. I don't want their stories ever to stop. I know they're going to have to stop at some point, because I'm not going to live forever, that's for sure. But if somebody else wants to pick them up, maybe in the future, that would be great. But right now, I want to write them. I love them so much. And you can see that passion in the eyes. You can hear it in the voice of these crowdfunders right now. And because they have that passion, they're instilling that passion in the comic readers. And that's what the spark, that's the spark that ignites a great run of comics. Not only a great run of comics, but a great run of comics that lead to more and more comics. And then a few years have gone by, and these people who are comic readers have taken these characters and made them part of their lives. And then they're going to be around for a long time. And new characters that people love, first editions, low print runs, extras in the books, These are all earmarks of something you should be grabbing as a collector. That's why I bought the first Jawbreakers Lost Souls, because I wanted this comic, because I'm looking at John Malin's art and I love it. And I'm listening to what the story is going to be like, and I think it's going to be great. But I bought several other issues beside that first one as a collector. I buy Cyberfrog. It's not really my thing. I know that Ethan Van Sciver is a great artist. He's just a little too DC for me. I'm a Marvel guy, and he's a little too DC. There's really a difference, if you ask me, between DC and Marvel artists. There's nothing wrong with his art. It's great, but it's just not something that appeals to me in the gut like Marvel art does. But, I ordered a copy of Cyberfrog because I think it's going to be a collector's item along with these other crowdfunding ones. And I'm just waiting for Red Rooster to come out. That looks amazing. That art is just above and beyond. That looks great. And you can tell the difference because, there's been crowdfunding around for a while now, a little while anyways, but you can tell the difference between what's going to be a collector's item and what's not by the passion that's behind it and the creative source. I'm looking at the guy, I don't even remember his name off the top of my head right now, who originally wrote Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He's out there doing crowdfunding for books, but he seems to be the old guard. He used to be the new up-and-comer a long time ago, but he's of the old guard now. And he's not going to take characters that he's going to make now and run with them for another 20 years. I just can't see that. Nor is he going to put a spark in people so he can hand them off to other people to run with them for 20 years. I can't see that happening. So really, I might take a look at his books. I might order something, but I really don't think I will. And then you have these other people like Kwanzaa Osajefu. How do you say his last name? Ofaz. I don't even know. It's a made-up name. I really don't care. It's made up for him anyways. It's not his real name. Just call him Kwanzaa. But he had trouble even fulfilling his orders and getting the book done. And as Zach says over at Diversity in Comics, SJWs don't human well. And you can see that when you look at these people's videos and they're sitting there with a blank stare and a straight face telling you how excited they are. You could tell they're not excited. These people are so used to complaining about everything that they don't actually know what excitement is. You can tell the difference between somebody like Kwanzaa and his comic, which was black, and how it's not going to be a collector's item because he has no excitement for it. And so if he has no excitement, there is no spark to put into your comic audience. And if you can't put that spark in there, then they're not going to want more. If they don't want more, it's not going to continue. If it's not going to continue, it's going to be forgotten. And you can see it in his videos that they're just going to be forgotten. There is no spark of excitement there, like there is in Richard Meyer, like there is in Ethan Van Sciver. And that's the key. That excitement is the key to looking at books and buying them, not just because you're a comic reader. Buying them, I suggest go buy them just because you're a comic reader. That's great. But they are a little bit expensive. So I don't mind buying them as a comic collector when they're expensive. There's a limit, of course, but still, I'll put out a little bit of money for something that I think is going to be worth a lot of money in the future. And I think these things, as a collector, that's why I bought more than one copy of Jawbreakers. And that's why I'm going to buy Red Rooster. That's why I bought Cyberfrog. And I'm looking at other things that I want to buy as well, because I want to buy them not just as a comic reader, but as a comic collector as well. And this is the new place for comic collectors to go. You're not going to get anything out of Marvel. You're not going to get anything out of DC anymore. If the things that they do put out do go up, they're going to go back down because their characters are going to be forgotten because they have no passion. They're not the house of ideas anymore. These new people with their crowdfunding sources, they are the new idea makers. And they are the people who are putting their heart and soul into these characters. And you can tell love their characters and want them to continue on, even if that means they have to hand them off to someone else. And doing that and taking these things and putting them into the world where the creators love them and they instill that love in the audience, that's something that's going to last. And something that lasts becomes a collector's item. And again, that's the second key. The first key is excitement. The second key is to actually put it into your audience. Because again, if you're one of these SJW writers who just tell people, well, you know what, don't buy my book because I don't want you to buy it because you're not the person I'm writing it for. Obviously, those books are not going to be around very long because they're alienating their audience. And you need that audience to keep your book alive, to keep your characters alive. You need it. Whereas you have John Malin, Richard Meyer, Ethan Van Sciver, a lot of these people, they are being great to their audience. They are giving them what they want. They're listening to what they want and giving it to them. And again, as I said a number of times, it's putting a spark into their readers or their future readers. And here's where I want to talk just a little bit directly to if anybody from the crowdfunding source is actually listening, anybody who's putting together a book is actually listening. I talked a little bit in one of my videos about the fact that for North American comics, one of the things that's actually part of the product is history. And if you have a new comic coming out from a new company and basically it's a new universe, you don't have that history. So people are going to be left a little wanting with their product because they're so used to it in Marvel and DC. And as someone who's a collector, as someone who's a reader, I've seen now the best way to bring this out, to bring this history to your readers before they even get the book. Because I really want to buy Red Rooster right now because of the art itself, but I really want to know what the stories are like, and I haven't gotten there. It's not sitting right in front of my face. I know if I dug a little more, I'd probably find out what the story is more about, but it needs to be right there, and people need to know what the story's about. And if you want to tell people what the story's about and present some of the art, because it is a visual medium, do so through sharing the history of your world, of your characters with your audience before you even get the book out there. That's the best way to do it. Richard Meyer, Diversity in Comics, he did that. And he shared his history for these characters on live stream, which is great because not only are you sharing the history of it, but you get customers asking questions and him responding, and there's almost an emotional bond being put together between these characters and the readers before any books are even made. And using this new medium as compared to the old medium of Marvel and DC and how they put out books, using new mediums like this is what crowdfunding sources need to do. They need to share that history because, again, as someone who has written characters and written an entire book of characters that he loves and stories that he loves, I have dozens of stories scribbled on scraps of paper, hiding in files in my computer, stuck in my head of the history of these characters. And if you love your characters, you do too. If you're a writer, if you're a creator, you have these scraps of paper where you doodle a design for what you think they should look like, or what their uniform looks like, or what your world looks like. All of these things. As long as they don't break your story or give away your ending or anything else like that, there's plenty of different ways that you can share it with people. Share that history and share it in ways that makes a connection with your audience before the book even comes out. And that way, when they buy the book and they actually get it, they actually have that history tacked on to their product just like they're used to. just like they're used to with Marvel and DC. And again, I think Zach over in Diversity in Comics, Richard Meyer, he did it masterfully without even really thinking about it by using live streams and YouTube videos. Because he got to share visuals, he got to share the story, he got to share his excitement, and you could hear it in his voice, and he talked directly to the readers and answered some of their questions and told them about their history, the history of his characters. Not only the creation of them, but what he thinks their world looks like. And that's what needs to be done, because you're going to have to share with your audience what your story is going to be about. Anyways, you can't just share visuals. I know it's a visual medium, but you can't just share visuals. You got to have some of the story in there. So why not share it in that way, which makes a connection, a real connection with your audience before the books even come out. So hopefully that will be what crowdfunding will seek to do throughout however long it lasts with these new comic books, with these new collector's items. So, oh yeah, I wanted to say as well that I'm going to put in the link in the description. I'm going to put links to, at the very least, Jawbreakers and Cyberfrog and Red Rooster and probably a couple of others, just in case anyone doesn't know where to look for them. And I'm also going to take some of my own advice here, because I am going to, well, I have plenty of stories from my own novel that I have kicking around, and I posted one of them on YouTube just because I thought maybe I would get agents to listen to it, but I never really got around to doing much with it. So I'm going to put that in the link as well, because I'm going to share my history of my characters. And hopefully, if you're interested in fantasy science fiction, you might just pop over and to my other YouTube channel, and it's only got one story in there right now, and listen to it. Tell me what you think. And also, if you have other crowdfunding comics that you want me to talk about or want other people to know about it, leave the link in the comments of this video. That would be great. I would appreciate that immensely, because I'm looking for new stuff, and I'm sure other people are looking for new stuff as well. So we need to share our knowledge of what we got with these things. And I know that with these new crowdfunded comic books, we are going to make comics great again. And for your collectors, you're going to have a great collection when you buy these books. All right, so it's a little bit of a different video. And again, I went on and on about it, but I think it's something very important to talk about. I will probably talk about it more directly with Red Rooster and possibly Cyberfrog if I get the time. All right, so that's all I have to say for today. Thanks for getting to the end of 30 minutes with me, if you're still here. I'll see you later. Bye.